Hello everybody, what is up? My name is Zero Solstice, and this is a very interesting game. So, what basically this entire game comes down to is rotations, and that is going to be the topic of discussion for today. What I would like to talk about is some mid-level rotational abilities and tactics that one should employ whenever they try to play ranked. Solo queue, duo queue, doesn't really matter. Just even when you just try to play a good game of Conquest in Guild Wars 2, it's important to understand how rotations work and what they do. And to assist me in talking about rotations, I brought myself the minimap this time around. In the first video, my overlay cut the minimap out, and I think it's generally most helpful and best if I leave the minimap on screen. So I have it overlaying my dank message, which you can read in the other video or at the beginning of this video when the fade-in is coming. So it doesn't really matter. But I brought the minimap so that I can talk about how rotations work. And right off the bat, as we get into it, what we can see right here, right now, is our opening split had us send 1 home for the cap, 1 far, and 3 mid. The one that went home for the cap came mid to help assist in the team fight. The issue is, as you can see now, the mid fight is going more or less nowhere, and we got decapped back at home. The far fight is still doing well. Our far fight is still 1v1ing, it's still holding the decap. That's good, that's great. They're doing their job. Their rotation is still strong and worth the time. However, the fact that we got decapped back at home means that we didn't appropriately rotate people off of mid as this team fight progressively just kept going longer. The longer the team fight goes, the more important it is to begin to realize that the team fight doesn't matter as much, because if nobody ever dies mid, but people continue to stay mid, that means that if you appropriately rotate your team away, then you can begin to create player advantage on the other points or other points of interest across the map. Points of interest are anything from the buffs here on Temple to the beasts on Forest of Niflhel or the Lord in Legacy of the Foefire. So this mid fight has already been going for almost 3 minutes, and neither team has capped the node. But at this point in time, the enemy team has been making the appropriate calls to have their team members rotate around the map to make sure that they cap home and they cap far. And in this case, home would be far for my team and far would be home for my team, but that's besides the point. So it ends up causing the situation where, because my team didn't rotate appropriately, we lost those caps and we end up coming to a pretty major point disparity as this game goes on. And I'm not going to spoil how this game ends, because we lose. I spoiled it. Oh well. But it's important to understand how rotations can absolutely affect a game, no matter when you start to put the rotations into effect. Sometimes it can be too late, naturally. But in general, if your team continues to play, it is always possible to win a game as long as you can keep rotations on point and generally win your fights. Because as this min fight has been going on for this long, one important thing to realize is that while rotation is important, it's also important for your team to actually be able to win their rotations. So you can see that Far is still decapped, and that's because the individual that we had rotate there early was fine in the 1v1, but he died in the 1v2. And it's perfectly fair and understandable to die in the outnumbered situation, especially after such a prolonged amount of time. But that also means that there should have effectively been a 4 versus 3 mid, with my team having 4 and the opposing team having 3. Now that means that we have an outnumbered situation, and we should have been better capable of cleaning up their team with the outmanned advantage. So half of the game comes down to rotations, and the other half comes down to the player skill of both teams to actually be able to win their fights. And this mid-fight has basically just come down to a bunch of individuals bunkering and dealing damage on the point to where no one is able to cap, but only one person dies maybe every 20 or 30 seconds, or even longer than that over time. So it creates this situation where mid is more or less mediated and just getting kills based on the fact that some players are getting out-sustained more or less. They're getting fatigued of their cooldowns and just generally whittled away. But as you can see, there's a pretty large point disparity now, and that's because we spent so long missing our rotation that the opposing team spent an easy 5.5 minutes into this game now just holding a 1 cap or a 2 cap on side nodes while we've been decapped both at mid and even at home. And we're slowly catching up now because now that we've realized after a minor team wipe at mid that fighting in a team fight, especially at mid, is a lost cause. Now we're appropriately sending people on rotations. So you can see we have home, mid is still lost, but far is decapped. So this is a much more workable situation. So now as long as our team, or even the opponent team, is able to win our fights, we can create a field advantage by appropriately capturing side nodes and holding side nodes and other things of that nature. So that's the basis of rotations and team fights. And now something to talk about is when it's appropriate to make those rotations. So as you can see, this node is still decapped, and one of my teammates died, but another one immediately showed up. So that means that while this fight is still regulated in the same terms, be that it's still a 2v2 because we effectively replaced one man with one that went full down, it does still mean that one of our men is off the map. So that means ultimately that in some location on this map, our team is outnumbered. And if that general trend continues to occur, if a general trend of one of our teammates dying, but then another immediately streaming in occurs, then we're basically creating a situation where we are always at a field disadvantage. Maybe not necessarily in captured nodes, but at least in players. And we're making it harder for ourselves to actually be able to continue playing or winning this game. And it's important to realize that by making it more, by constantly streaming instead of having important resets, like just having that downed person plus the fresh body go somewhere else, that we're creating a situation where we could just effectively snowball ourselves. So the fact that someone died in the 2v2 and was immediately replaced could very well easily mean that the person that was already there prior to being replaced could be the next one to go down, and it could just create this chain of people dropping and people immediately replacing them, but the fight advantage never changing, to where if the opponents are strong enough players, they could continue that role just indefinitely, to the point where we are always at a disadvantage and the fight never actually changes. And that's when you end up, that is the kind of situation where a very strong team could potentially 3-cap you, when they can infinitely cause you to be at a player disadvantage, whether that's by always having someone down or just by always being capable of winning in outnumbered situations or even numbered situations. Then they can keep you just completely locked out of the game. And I think it's important to realize exactly how much rotations and how much keeping field advantage can have an impact on a game as you play it. So that's a lot on the rotation topic that I can kind of come off the top of my head with. So for this game, the score is much closer now than it was previously. The score after the mid-fight fiasco was about 240 points to 40 points with my team trailing. And now we've caught up to 420 to 290. Still losing, but because we were able to get our rotations onto point, and we've been starting to win fights, we managed to get a double cap. And now because we managed to create a outnumbered situation where we just managed to kill 2 of the enemy team, not simultaneously, but strung out, one after the other. Now we're able to make a rotation to pressure the mid-fight to decap that. And this allows us to keep them from getting any more points until they manage to recap or kill people or anything of that nature. So we were able to use that player advantage to to effectively knock off the only point they still had by outmanning the fight. I believe we managed to make it a 3v1 or a 3v2, and we managed to knock them off the node to decap. So while we do lose this fight here, as I am bleeding out downstate, 2 of our teammates are now dead, but 3 of their team are stuck on mid, either cleaving out corpses, on rotation, or recapping the node. So while the score is still this close to them being able to just win it, this does still cause an advantage for us across the map to where we can still win and protect these side node fights until these respawns come back up, especially the home node, because the players that are now on respawn will be fully reset, full health, have most of their cooldowns back, and be able to head immediately home and just hard plus that situation. And what's also pretty strong to notice here is that while we had a lot of their team mid, so that they could try to re-win that fight and re-win that node, a player on our team managed to use that outnumbered situation and get the mid buff, Stillness. Pardon the voice crack, it's been a very long day. But because of that, we were able to further fill in the gap, and then we were able to +1 the home fight, hold the cap, kill the individual that was there, and win the game by those 5 kill points, 500 to 495. And I think the most interesting thing about this is we have a Mesmer teammate in downstate this entire time that's just about to die, and oh god, we did not deserve to win this fight. We did not deserve to win this game. But rotations, powerful mechanics. And I would also like to take this moment to rewind this video about 30 seconds and point out, never leave a druid to bleed out, because they have pet res, and pet res is absurd, and you will never bleed out a druid, okay? Just stomp them, please.